We're snorting cap rates and shooting up cash flow here at Deal Junkies. Welcome back to Deal Junkies. We are so excited to be back in the studio. I won't tell you where we were last week. Or should I tell them where we were last week?
Tell them.
Yeah.
So I went to Maui to work from Maui. It was kind of stressful, but the sun came out. It was great. My wife, we went to this nice place over in Wailea, and we walked into the room, and I said, "You rented a 4-bedroom condo on the ocean for the two of us?" She said, "Yeah, I wanted 2 bathrooms." That was her answer. And I said, "Well, we need more people here." So I texted Dane and Trevor, and I said, "You guys should come work from Maui for the week." So, like the good kids they are, within 48 hours, I picked them up from the airport. So we were going to record this episode last week. Thank you for your flexibility.
Wait, how come you didn't invite Mike to Maui if it was
We did invite Mike, but Mike had he had other plans. Yeah, but you were in Seattle or somewhere.
Let me add context. I got invited after I told them I had the inside scoop on the deal and that I could get them the deal.
This is what it takes to get to Maui.
Yeah,
Mike,
yeah.
You got to bring a deal.
I wasn't part of the club until I actually had a deal involved with them. So
you know what it takes now.
Yeah.
We're Deal Junkies. You got to bring value. You got to bring us a hit, man.
You have to bring value.
Okay, so today we have a very special episode. We're all super excited to welcome a guest into the Deal Junkies podcast, Michael Hamilton of Seneca Development. I've listened to Michael talk a couple of times, and I've heard you on some podcasts. Super impressed by you. I'm sure you hear that a lot. If you don't, you should. Michael is a 29-year-old real estate developer who's been in the business now for, I guess, in your 20s, all of your adult life. You've been a GC and a developer, developed close to $80 million worth of projects, currently bringing stuff out of the ground up in the Portland area. Sounds like you have about 850 units in your pipeline coming out of the ground. Blown away by what you're doing and super excited to pick your brain today and learn more about who you are and what makes you tick. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Glad you're here. We'll do this in a way where I want to know a little bit about you and your background and where you started. Trevor's going to interrupt me at some point. He's going to want to talk about a dealer. He loves to hear about your pain points. So I'm sure at some point he's going to go like, when did it hurt? Really
I've asked Michael that question.
Oh, you already know? You already know?
Pretty much every time I see Trevor, he's like, so.
You should start asking people like when it was really good.
Well, it's really good most of the time. I want to know when it was really hard and how he got through it. Okay. You'll love it. You'll love his story.
Okay. So you're going to tell us how to get through a hard time. And I'm sure, Mike and you can geek out on some of the more construction detail stuff, which
CLT.
You guys start saying things that don't make any sense to me. So don't be surprised if I ask you questions about, stop and tell us what this means. So let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back. You're not a very old man, so this shouldn't be too hard for you to remember. Going back to where this all began, give us a bit of your DNA. What makes you a real estate developer? Did you know this when you were a kid? Were you entrepreneurial? Or did you grow up in a real estate family? How did this all start?
Yeah. So came from pretty humble beginnings. The short story is I was down at Lane Community College down in Eugene, dual enrolled at University of Oregon, and I hated school. And I don't want to call it an epiphany, but my thought was, I want to make a lot of money, obviously, for all the reasons people want to make money. But I was thinking, gosh, there's 15,000 kids that graduate every year, and they're not going to be millionaires within the next 5 years. Maybe one will be because they're some prodigy. But my thought was always, if I can spend the time that I should have in college developing a skill set, by the time that I would have graduated, I would be ready to hit the ground running. So I was at an internship up here in Portland my sophomore year, and someone said to me, gosh, you should get into real estate. You should be a real estate agent. You got a good personality.
Internship that you were doing for school, or just one you went out and found yourself?
One I went out and found myself. I had a family friend. They own the second largest private steel drum manufacturer in the U.S. And they
steel drums,
55-gallon steel drums. So they're yeah, and that was eye-opening because it was like their customers were like Treetop Apple Juice, Chevron. They had military contracts, and that was mind-blowing to me. But while I was there, again, people were like, God, you got a good personality, you should sell real estate. So I did what anybody that's an entrepreneur does and started emailing and calling real estate agents. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I'm calling like general contractors, anybody to try and understand and get my foot in the door.
How old are you at that time?
I think I'm 18 at that time.
like any good 18-year-old would do. Started emailing developers and contractors.
That's what I was doing.
I mean, I actually think I emailed the vice president of real estate for Nike. And he was like, hey, thanks for reaching out. We don't have anything at this time. And I was like, no problem. I get it.
Did you know you were 18? Did you know that, like, did you think other people your age were doing this sort of thing? What put this idea in your head?
Honestly, no. I didn't really think about what other people were doing. I guess my thought was, I don't have any skills and I don't have any money, so I might as well be proactive in some way. Mm-hmm. And the only way to be proactive at that point for me was trying to communicate with people and learn. So I ended up having one flipper reach out to me and say, hey, interviewed me over the phone and said, hey, we've got an opportunity. I think this is a sexy way of saying cold calling, but to be a part of our acquisitions team.
Oh, yeah.
And at 18, I was like, that sounds great.
Hit the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ended up dropping out of school, working for that gentleman for a short period of time, maybe about a year and a half. But what I had learned during that process, and again, we're talking like cosmetic fix and flips, was how important the construction was on a fix and flip. You got such a tight timeline, and if you don't hit your budget, you don't hit your timeline, you eat up your profit pretty quick. And so I thought, man, if I can start a general contracting company and morph it into a development company down the line using my expertise as a general contractor, that would be my value. It's like I can't bring $1 million to a deal, but I can bring my experience as a GC. So I went up to Washington, because in Washington, to get your license, you just have to pay your bond and insurance and $150 license.
You're talking about to become a general contractor.
Yes.
You just go pay $195 and you're a general contractor.
Yep, and your insurance and your bond, and you're ready to rock in Washington. So
you don't have to take a test or know anything.
Nope.
Okay, so for $195, now you're a general contractor.
Yes.
Now you have some skills.
Yes, there you go. That's
at least on paper, you have skills.
Yes.
You have enough skills to protect the state from liability. That's all that fucking matters.
There you go.
You can't hold a hammer, you don't know a screw, you don't know how to read plans.
Nothing, man. Yeah. I knew nothing. And I was like, okay, I got to generate some business. And so I ended up doing this, my very first remodel, and I did it wrong, was splitting a master bedroom into 2 rooms. Really small job. I mean, we're talking like $6,000. The owner comes in and they're like, no, we didn't want the wall this way. We wanted it this way. Sweet. Great. So that was the start of my career, was that.
Is that when you learned how to read plans?
Still no. But simultaneously, Airbnb was getting really popular. Mm-hmm. And so I had, up in Washington, I started just leasing apartments and then subleasing them through Airbnb. And that started opening my mind to the world of rentals and real estate. I was like, wait a minute, like there's cash flow coming every month from this. This is pretty nice.
Arbitrage, we call that.
Arbitrage, yep. And so obviously regulations in Seattle kind of stepped up a bit. Didn't make a ton of sense for me. And the hardest part about it was expanding it. It was really great when I had 5 of them. But when I had 10 of them, it was a nightmare. But at the time, I was probably now 20, maybe 21. And again, at the time, I thought I had a ton of money because I was like, wow, I've been making all this money from Airbnb. My thought was to move down to Los Angeles and network and try and plant a flag down there. And I had the ability of meeting Snoop Dogg's son, Cordell Broadus, down in Los Angeles, and was kind of telling him what I was doing. And he was like, man, I got a friend in Vegas who's your age doing something very similar. You need to meet him. And so he took me to Vegas, and I met this gentleman who was a developer. He was actually a year younger than me, and he had a nice bucket of cash and was doing like $3 or $4 million homes down in Newport Beach, California. And I told him, hey, I'm a contractor. I can build these $3 or $4 million homes for you. And so we teamed up, probably did about 5 of those homes. And then I went to him and was like, hey, if we're going to spend $2.5 million on a house in Newport, come up to Portland where I'm from, because you can build something more substantial up there. So I brought them up. I think now it's probably 2017. I brought them up, drove them through Sherwood, all the way through Portland, and they loved it. And they eventually made an offer on a small 18-unit building and went to me and said, hey, if we buy this and close on it, it's permit ready. Can you build it? And as any entrepreneur...
So it's not out of the ground. They're just
not out of the ground. Yeah,
they're buying something entitled for 18 doors in Portland.
Yep. And of course, as any entrepreneur, I overcommitted and was like, yeah, of course I can build an apartment building, no problem. And then...
Because you have the $195 license to do it.
Well, at that point in Oregon, I ended up going through and taking the test. But yes.
Oh, so now you took the test and now you can build it. Yeah. That's all you got to do?
Yeah. So I'm curious, before you got there and you were building these houses for these guys, what'd you do in between messing up your wall and then building a $2.5 million house?
Well, he had to learn how to build. I'm guessing in there you learned along the way.
Well, a lot of it was once I had the cash flow from the Airbnbs, I pretty much reinvested a lot of it into hiring a good team. Like I had hired guys that had 15, 20 years experience as a superintendent and project manager.
So you still don't know how to build?
Hardly. Yeah. I mean, even today, I feel like I don't know.
But you knew how to manage.
You know how to find the people that know how to build.
Yes.
You're the visionary.
It's the difference between a developer and a builder.
Yes.
So how much cash flow do you have from like 5 Airbnbs? It's enough to start funding a team to...
Yes and no. It was enough to fund a small team. I probably had 2 guys, but that was up in Seattle. So once I went down to Los Angeles, I kept my dry powder on the sideline. And once I made a deal to build these houses in Newport, I essentially did the same thing. I looked up who are the best GCs in Newport, drove around a couple job sites, went to these guys, offered them more money than they were getting paid at their jobs, and kind of stole them for these phases of projects. So that was essentially how I built my team in Portland too. It was like I would drive around to Seabolt sites and J.E. John sites and talk to the superintendents. And hey, what are you getting paid? Oh, like $120. Well, I'm starting something. What if I paid you $140? And just started drawing talent that way.
So when you committed to building these $2.5 million homes, you didn't say, I'm going to go build these. You essentially, your commitment was, I'm going to go create a team to build them.
Yes.
So you're going to be my partner. I'm going to go in and be the boots on the streets. We're going to create our own brand new team.
Yep.
And do these in a better way.
Yep.
It's fucking awesome. I love it.
And it was a pain in the ass. I mean, I don't know if you guys have been down to Balboa Island, but it is different. I mean, it's a freaking island. And so when we're talking about a foundation, you're building a foundation in the sand. And so that was where we were starting to do excavation, and I was like, oh shit, there's no clay here. It's all sand.
So now you got to learn about helical piling?
Oh, you know it, man. Oh, everything. Yeah. And water tables, it's an island, so you can only go down so deep before you start hitting water. But foundations, I mean, we're talking like 2,000 square foot sites, right? Foundation probably costs $200,000.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about you were in, so you started in Eugene, you're in school, you decide you want an education, but you don't want the formal education that the college is giving you, but you're still hungry for knowledge. You've got a thirst for information you're not getting from school, which is why you probably don't like it, right?
That's exactly it.
So you decide, I need to go find the information I'm looking for. And you go off, and between internships, you're now saying, I think I can find this information. And something led you to Seattle and then to LA. Why did you feel like you had to relocate to get the information that you were trying to glean?
It was a balance of finding information. It was also, I mean, I kind of look at things black and white. And my thought was, in Los Angeles, there's a ton of money. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of money in Newport. It was like, man, if I'm eventually going to develop and raise millions of dollars, there's only so many people in Oregon to do that from. Where in LA, you can kind of close your eyes and throw a dart. You're going to find somebody that has money. And that turned out to be true. I mean, it was networking down there was about 80% of what I did, was meeting people that were interested in real estate, had capital, didn't understand how to do it, which then eventually led me to this development.
Were you single during this time?
I was, yeah.
So you're just hyper focused on building your business.
Yeah. I mean, my apartment in LA, all glass windows, there's just writing on all the windows. It probably looked like a crazy person house, but really it was organized chaos.
This is like
Is that
the
a beautiful
mind. That's what I was just going to say.
Yes.
Yeah. He's underwriting deals on his windows in his apartment.
I'm so jealous right now.
Oh, wow. There'll be a movie about this one day. I think that's such a cool story. Okay, so it was just an instinct for you to say, I know that I need to partner with folks, or I need to network with folks that have money, and getting out of my neighborhood and going into these other areas where there's a lot more money is going to be a better start for me. Did you always feel like you'd come back into the Portland market, or did you think you would build a business down south?
I think at the time when I went down there, I thought I would build it down south. Okay. But organically, once I brought them up to Portland, I was like, wow, this makes a lot more sense for me. For two reasons. One, this is where I'm from. So I know Portland really well. I know the locations really well. Down in Los Angeles, I couldn't really tell you what was a good neighborhood or not. But that was a value that I could bring these developers was, you don't want to be, east of 39th and Cesar Chavez. You want to be on the west side of it.
Sure.
So yeah.
That's interesting. Wow, I'm kind of blown away. Trevor, you want get into where you want to go. I can see your brain. I can feel your brain just churning from where I'm sitting.
Well, I want to go a couple different ways. I want to start. So we've talked about it a little bit. If you want to share, during that time in LA, you had some difficulties, right? You were running into and whatnot, and that's what I want to touch on. Is just showing people it's like sounds really awesome, but the whole time you were going through that, you were going through ups and downs and all sorts of different periods.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is ups and downs that you would expect from someone that's never built a project down in Newport Beach, California, right? You got to balance expectations of the developer while also balancing the reality of getting it done. So luckily I had a good relationship with the developer, but one of the issues I ran into is building a house that's 3,000 square feet. I'm like, that takes like 7-8 months. That's not a big deal. No, down there it takes about 12 to 14 months. You've got one-way bridge to get on the island. I remember when we were doing our foundation, I actually had to drive up to the gas station that was on the other side of the island, talk to the guy at the gas station, say, hey, I'm going to have a bunch of dump trucks parked out outside of this gas station so we can get this pour done. So it was stuff like that where, you never run into it. And even here in Portland, you don't run into that. But it really helped me understand the logistics of construction.
So going back to how you learned how to do this, did you ever go back and take another course, or did you just learn by doing and meeting all these people that could do it? You just literally learned while building these projects.
Yeah, no. So I didn't take like any certificates or anything.
So part of that learning lesson is usually sleepless nights and losing a lot of money. How much of that happened to you in those years?
That's where I was trying to guide my question.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what story you're wanting me to tell.
We want the worst one.
But I can tell you, I had done probably 20 million of construction down there and made maybe a couple $100,000.
I remember when we were at the meetup up in Portland and you were speaking, I asked you the same type of question. You were talking about like you weren't sleeping, you were just in the shower one day like, holy shit, I don't even know if this is going to work. Tell us about that. Yeah,
well, this was after I had met my girlfriend and she ended up being pregnant. Which is great because
by you, hopefully.
He looks like me, so he's on my insurance, and I'm paying for his private school. All right.
Well, we can pretend anyway.
And that was pretty scary because all the decisions I had made were pretty, I don't want to say rash, but they were impulsive. But I just acted on it.
You were a gunslinger.
Yeah.
Now you got a little family.
It's exactly it, and it was like the only thing that my mistakes had impacted at that point were me, which I'm like, okay, great, I can shoulder that. But now that there was this caveat added to it, like Trevor said, there was a moment where I was in the shower and I was just like, I remember just like almost crying and being like, what the fuck am I going to do? How am I going to be able to pursue what I want to pursue while also making sure I'm protecting my family's interests?
Providing some stability.
Yeah. So that was, honestly, it made me grow up, and it actually helped in the long run because now I wasn't just doing it for me. It's like when I was negotiating, it was always like, God, how can I get the best deal for myself? Now it's like, I'm not negotiating for myself. I'm negotiating for what my kids are going to have in the next 30, 40 years.
How old were you when your kid was born?
24.
Okay. Yeah. Boy or girl?
Boy.
So you have a 5-year-old boy.
Yep.
That's fun.
Yeah. And then I got a 20-month-old boy too.
Oh,
and they're complete
the
opposites.
family's growing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, no, we're done now.
Oh,
I've had a
that's
surgical procedure.
that's
done.
So
best
if I
decision
can,
I ever made.
Yeah.
I want to connect the dots with what Trevor got you. So that's 2018, 17, 18. You've already moved back to Portland at this point.
I moved back to Portland, like 17ish.
Okay. And so you're in a shower. Is this just a project-related market conditions thing, or is this just a quarter-life risk crisis, my identity's changing scenario?
Yeah, it was a combination of things. One of the guys that I had hired up here, who I had heavily relied on, he was like my project executive, ended up finding out that he was charging change orders to projects and getting kickbacks. And obviously, as the owner of the company, I'm having to contact my developers and say, hey, I probably owe you some money. I'm trying to figure out how much that is. So a combination of, like a reputational issue along with life changing. I was just like, what the fuck is going on?
You probably got good respect from them though for making that call and letting them know. Like,
I still work with them today. So yeah.
So you're having some difficult times, but during those times, you're trying to figure out how you're going to provide the stability. You're trying to figure out how you're going to grow the business. You're 25, you're 24, 24, 25 years old. So you're a young man at that point. So how did you balance it? I mean, what was the takeaway for you? How do you provide? Are you still doing some of this short-term thing to bring in income to provide stability, or did you get rid of those?
No, I got rid of those. Once I had moved back up from LA to Portland, I decided to just focus on the GC side of the business. Simultaneously, Airbnbs in LA were getting nuts. I mean, it was like you couldn't do it. You really couldn't do the arbitrage anymore. Apartments just weren't allowing it. So when I had moved back up here, solely focused on the GC side of the business. Sorry, what was your question?
I'm trying to figure out how you did the balancing act of.
I mean, I got a lifeline, to be honest with you. I'm a believer, so I think God just was like, hey, this guy's having a hard time. I'm going to give him something here. And so I had been building for multitude of developers that all had the same bank. I would say about 60% of the product all was one bank funding these different developers. And had these guys approach me saying, hey, you were recommended to us to GC this 55-unit project. Our GC just went out of business, so we're permit ready, but we're looking for a GC.
Wow, okay.
And this was a large project for me, 55 units, podium deck, 5-story building.
Tell us what a podium deck is. In layman's terms, like this is not a normal build. This is not a normal building, right?
Yeah, no, it's a post-tension concrete. It essentially acts as a foundation above the first floor.
Oh,
so you do your foundation, you put in columns, you put a podium deck in. You've probably got, I don't know, a couple thousand tendons in this deck.
Tendons being like rebar? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, and cables as well.
Cable, okay.
Yeah, and
like
don't
tension.
ask me what the cables are made of.
They tension these things, tighten them down, and then pour concrete on that.
They pour it, and then they wait for it to harden. And while it's hardening, they start tightening them.
So this is a foundation that floats 1 story off the ground.
Yes.
For your building.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So the first time you ever done that?
First time I'd ever done it. Yep. Yeah.
Were you scared?
Luckily, I had a good team.
Okay, so your team knew what they were doing. They'd done these before?
Yeah, so I had hired a superintendent, and then I had reached out to his former boss and was like, hey, I'm doing a podium deck. Can this guy do it? And he's like, dude, this guy's the best at doing podium decks. So I was like, okay, great. And the guy did do a good job. So we did this podium deck project. Well, I guess I'll rewind. Got introduced to these guys, and I looked at it as an opportunity to implement what my original plan was I've got value as a GC. How can I start getting into the development world? I knew their budget was tight. Like any developer, they've got an $8 million budget. In reality, it's $9-10 million. So I went to them and said, hey, I can get this budget down, but I can get it down even further if I waive my general contracting
There
fee.
you go.
And so I waived my fee, kind of reverse engineered what their equity position was in the project, and said, hey, if you can give me 25% of the project, I'll be a personal guarantee on the loan with you guys, which obviously now I'm incentivized to GC to make sure the budget's low and on time. and a little bit of back and forth, and ultimately we're like, yeah, we'd love to have you do that.
So this 55 unit, this is kind of your first big break.
Yep.
And you were able to work yourself into an equity position in that deal.
Yes.
So now you're working your sweat equity. You're building now your portfolio rather than your stability. So you must have cash flow coming in on other projects or on other things.
What was nice about it is I waived my fee, but I kept my general conditions. So everything to operate the business, I still had in the budget. I was included in that budget.
I see. So you had a salary.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's separate from the profit of the deal.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was a way that I was like, okay, great. I know I'm good for the next 16 months.
You have your expenses baked in there, and then the profit that was in gets put into the deal for equity.
Exactly.
So you went out and learned how to make yourself valuable, and then you found somebody you could become valuable to.
Yep.
And you pitched that value to them to get equity in a deal.
Yep.
I mean, there's the formula, guys.
That's it.
You don't need to know anything else. You did it.
That's it.
Nobody taught you how to do that.
No.
You went out and did that instinctually. That to me is the really impressive part. You didn't hear that in a podcast or a book or anywhere else. You just came up with that.
I mean, to me, it just seemed like common sense. I mean, it's like in any deal, when you partner with someone's bringing value, another person's bringing value, and it's not always capital. And that's how I tried to look at it was, I'm not really pitching you on this like, hey, can I get into this deal? It's, hey, I can really help your budget.
So you said you wanted to be rich. What made you? What got you to real estate? What made you decide?
Real quick, did you see how he framed that? Like you framed it as I can. It's just a really good. I'm sorry.
No.
I can't remember, but that was just a really good negotiation technique for anyone that was just listening. Was you didn't try and pitch yourself. You said, I'm showing you how to lower your value or cost, which creates value, and this is how I fit in. On top of that, I'm willing to then lower value, which now lowers the amount of liquidity that's necessary. It lowers a whole lot of things. And so in the way commercial construction budgets work, you have your costs built in. You have a project manager. You have your office cost, right? So you have costs, and then the fee itself is then essentially goes to you as the owner. So you're saying I can operate a business, get paid to operate a business, and then my fee as an owner, I can just take that and move it into the owner of the development portion.
Exactly.
So you essentially double the value of your fee because now you're creating equity. So for every dollar of construction you're managing and spending, you're creating a dollar of equity that you're getting a percentage of.
Yep.
It's a really good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And doing it by instinct. That's super impressive. So I want to go back in time again to where you said, when you're in school, you said, I want to make money for all the reasons that people want to make money. How come you picked real estate?
You're going to love this. I Googled how do you make a ton of money without a college degree?
And it said real estate?
And then real estate was one of the options. And I was like, you know what? That sounds pretty good.
You Googled it. Everybody on planet Earth almost has access to this information.
What year was that?
Oh, man. I was probably 17, 18 years old at that point. I can't remember.
2002, 2000.
This is like 10, 11 years ago?
This is like 2015.
I can't even relate to that.
2012?
Do you realize, I was in real estate when you were still in diapers. That's awesome.
Well, I just got out of diapers, so.
And that goes for you guys as well.
Yeah, I'm sitting around with a bunch of young geniuses here. So I think Mike's got something you want.
Yeah, so we learned, right? So when we had Mark on, we didn't geek out about construction at all. And I realized I missed a great opportunity to just start geeking out with a builder. You're a developer, so you even have a different, Mark is as well, but you have a different mindset as far as you look at it from a developer mindset. To get a background people miss, we started talking about CLT. Mm-hmm. You're talking about podium construction. So you're talking about it from a materials concept that I hear very few people talk about in construction. It's this many units and this much dollars, and we bought the land in this location, we get these rents, and it's this NOI and this cap rate. But there's a whole mix of everything to get to that point. What you choose to build, where you choose to build it, why you choose to build it, all the market conditions and cycles that are happening at the time, and the pain that Trevor wants to know about that we didn't really get into, but the timing that you chose to take this business model into the Portland market was like if you did it a year or two later, you really would have been screwed.
Yeah.
You did it a year or two too late to really hit that wave. So you weren't at like the worst time to do it, but you weren't at a good time to do it.
Yes.
And so and I don't want to paint that whole, but market conditions changed.
Oh, yeah.
Laws changed. What you can build, everything changed in a vacuum that created inventory swings. Now coming back out of that, what do you want to build? What are you excited about? What type of projects are you like, okay, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
I learned this lesson.
Yeah.
And then how do you see, and I do want to get onto CLT, because what I hear is a person who thinks in 10, 20-year time frames.
Yes.
And that is a completely different analysis into projects than the average person. So I'd love to kind of take the conversation that direction, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the question?
Yeah. So
100 questions.
I was like, what do you want me to start?
You can't pull one question out of all that? So first what are you not going to do? What are you refusing to do moving forward, and what are you most excited about doing?
So I prefer density. It makes a project a whole hell lot easier, in my opinion. It also makes the numbers better. I mean, every deal's relative. I mean, if you're out in Hillsborough, a garden style project obviously makes the most sense. But I like being in Portland because nobody else likes being in Portland. That makes, especially now, it makes bidding on land a lot easier.
Less competition.
Less competition.
More of a buyer's market, really, because everybody's going like, no, I'll go anywhere but Portland.
Yes.
You're like, no, okay, that's fine. I'll stay here in my own backyard.
And it's complicated. I mean, I'm sure Mike can speak to it and probably has. It's a pain in the ass to go through the city of Portland with the design and permitting aspect, all the inspections, all that stuff. But luckily, as a GC, I kind of cut my teeth. So I know a lot of the building inspectors. I know who's coming to the job. Like, oh gosh, it's this guy. All right, we know what he likes. So that's an advantage that I want to keep, because it takes a long time to build that. And then obviously with my team being integrated, they've also got that experience. So that's a big component of why we're in Portland, why we do infill. Typically do podium deck projects, because a lot of what we build is on major thoroughfares like Williams, Hawthorne, and we like the flexibility of a podium deck for what it does on the ground floor.
What's it do?
It allows you to reprogram the ground floor any which way you like.
What's that mean, reprogram?
So let's say I've got a 15,000 square foot site and I do a podium deck. I can probably fit 3 or 4 retail locations, a couple thousand square feet apiece. I can also, at the end of those terms, and someone approaches me saying, hey, I want to put a brewery in there. Great. I can blow out all the steel framing and I can throw a brewery in there. So if I do wood construction, I don't have that flexibility on the ground floor.
And why is that? Because it's the way it holds the building up?
Yeah, there's just, when I'm doing a deck, our 55 unit building, I've probably got 12 columns holding up the deck.
Okay.
Maybe 13 columns.
So you have what I've heard this called like clear span in industrial or something. Like, is this kind of the idea is you don't have a bunch of columns holding the building up, so you can just knock every wall down that you want and do whatever you want. Yep. So it's just way more flexible use.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was something that when we did our 55 unit building, it was during COVID. And before COVID had started, we had a brewery reach out to us and say, hey, we want to do a brewery here. And I'm like, sweet, that's going to be great for the tenants. Then COVID happened. Those conversations fell off a cliff. And I'm like, okay, there's no way we can do retail in this building, because the way I see it, there's never going to be retail again. So we were able to redesign the ground floor and turn it into 5 residential units.
Wow.
And so that's what we've done. That's currently what's there, with the intent that, hey, if 3 or 4 years it continues to develop on that street, we can blow it out and put it in a great retail space.
And the cost of that's got to be less, I would imagine, because it's less complex.
The remodel portion of it? Oh, absolutely. I mean, in comparison to doing wood frame, you couldn't do it. You wouldn't be able to.
But you still got to bring in plumbing, electrical, do the whole thing.
Yes.
But it's just easier to blow those walls out and reconfigure.
It's drywall and steel framing.
Can you reuse that steel framing once it comes down, or is it toast after its first use?
We'd probably redo it. Yeah, we'd probably get
put new stuff in. Yeah. Okay. So there is some cost, but it's not as costly if it were wood.
Yeah, not as costly. And like I said, it's like depending on what you've done on your ground floor with wood frame, you probably couldn't do it. You probably couldn't blow out these walls, because where's the weight being held?
So one of the things, so going back to Mike's question, you wouldn't do wood frame you would always want to do this podium style because you like the density, you like the infill and the location. So you don't do any like woody walk up, mid rise, garden low rise, mid rise type style.
But it's all location based, right? It's real estate, location. So if there is a location, we've got one off of Burnside. When we went through the design process, we didn't foresee it as an area that would blow up with retail. So that one, let's keep costs low. Let's do 4 stories, stick frame construction, really easy for us to do. But again, for us, we like being in those pockets of, Williams, Hawthorne, Mississippi District.
Why not just go build 200-300 unit woody walk-ups out in Beaverton, Hillsborough or somewhere? Like what makes you stay in the middle of the city building these kind of projects?
Partly is the advantage we have with the experience as a GC.
So it, now it's your wheelhouse, so you can rinse and repeat.
Yep.
Okay.
And a lot of it is, my anticipation in the Portland market. I think right now there's 1,000 units that are into the city. Typically, it's about 6,000 to 8,000 units. Mm-hmm. So I'm anticipating a massive shortage in Portland. Yeah, I want to have units delivering when there's not units delivering.
So that could be true though for any unit, right? But you're just talking about like what I'm trying to get at is what attracts you to that particular asset type. Why don't you spread your wings a little and do other types of development now that you know that you can build pretty much anything you want to build?
That's a good question. I think right now, part of it is our pipeline is, I couldn't take on another project if I wanted to. We've kind of got to get through these next 5 to 6 years of building out the portfolio. But, I'm 29 and I'm hopefully going to be doing this for another 30 years or so. And eventually that's my goal, is to expand into different markets, but do it methodically. And when I say different markets, I don't just mean like Hillsborough. I mean, okay, maybe one day we go to Scottsdale or Nashville and expand. But right now, it's all about building track record, institutional track record. So a large part of our fundraising, we're raising about $50 million. We've already raised about 25. And a good component or a good chunk of that other 25 will likely be institutional capital. And those,
tell us what institutional capital is.
They're typically private groups that do alternative investments. So they do like pref equity investments, common equity investments. But essentially they're big check writers. So those guys don't write checks for less than $10 million. And that's like a small check for them to write. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is build a track record to prove like, yeah, you can write me one $10 million check and this is what I will do with that money. And so that's kind of been my focus and a good reason why I've stayed in Portland, because I'm like, I know I can perform in Portland.
So when you first came into your 55 unit deal, you came in, you did not syndicate that deal. You pitched your developer fee in or your contractor fee in for equity. Mm-hmm. Take us down the path of where that led to into making you become a syndicator. When did you start deciding, okay, now that I have the track record, I can go build these projects and I can fundraise and piece this together?
Yeah, it was probably halfway through the construction on that project. I mean, even for me, it was the first time building that. So once I saw the deck go up and started seeing the first floor go up, I'm like, oh, this is a real construction project. This is a real commercial construction project. This is something that I can bring someone to and say, this is what we do. Do you want to throw $1 million at what we do? So I slowly started getting into it as that project progressed. And once it was completed and finished and looked great, I pretty much spend 80% of my time raising capital and networking for capital.
What's that look like?
It's really fun. No.
You hitting the phones? Are you flying to LA again, meeting with Snoop Dogg? How do you find money? Like, are you attracting it through? I see some videos of you on Facebook and stuff like that.
It's funny. Like 2 years ago, I would have never put stuff on Instagram. I honestly think it might have been you guys that were like, oh, you need to start posting stuff. Like, it really helps. But it's a lot of word of mouth. And, I've had one investor, he was driving by a project I was doing and he called me and was like, hey, I'm looking to 1031 into something. You guys have anything to 1031 into? I'm like, no, but I've got a piece of land that I'm going to develop if you want to check it out. And he ended up putting $2 million into that deal. I had a buddy I went to high school with that had introduced me to somebody that put $3 million into a deal. It's all just been word of mouth. We've got an investor portal where people can look at our deals and subscribe to our deals, but 95% of the capital that we've raised has just been through conversations with people that have organically come to us.
Are you the only partner in Seneca? Do you have other?
No, I've got two other partners. One of them's Bryant Jacksick, and him and I essentially run all the finance, development, design. And then our other partner, Andy Schreck, he's a project executive for our construction team, but he's a partner at Seneca. He previously worked at Mortensen, did like the Portland Museum. Prior to that, he was down in San Francisco, built all the buildings at the Foundry Square. He did the first phase of the Nike World Campus. Probably done about $1.5 billion of construction. And so when he was at Mortensen, he was getting paid, a couple $100,000. I was like, listen, dude, I'll pay you the same thing you're getting at Mortensen, and I'll give you a piece of the development company. Mm-hmm. He was like, yeah, I'll do that. And so that was a huge weight off my shoulders because I don't really worry about the construction anymore. But it was also a resume to point to say there's not really a building in Portland. I mean, even the Ritz-Carlton, Andy's built 60, 70-story buildings in San Francisco. There's not a building in Portland that we technically don't have the capability to build. And that's gone a long way, not just with banks, but also equity investors, knowing that, like, okay, there is some risk that you guys are building your own product, because if you guys screw up, it's on you. So that's been a good tool for us.
So you pieced together a partnership that really built the resume out. I mean, it was very strategic from many different angles.
Yes. Yeah.
So are they helping you fundraise?
Yes and no. Andy, I would say he stays in his lane with the construction side. That's what he knows. But Brian and I pretty much tag team the fundraising aspect. He'll get phone calls from someone that's like, hey, you need to talk to this guy, and we'll meet with them, and vice versa.
So you're spending a lot of your time now out. You're kind of the face of the company. You're putting the word out, what you guys are doing. You're meeting with investors. You're meeting with people. And how do you drum up the leads? Are you guys, how do you get somebody with money to know about you and want to be interested in coming after one of your deals?
Man, I wish I knew the answer to that. I'd probably have raised the other 25 if I did.
Have you met with any institutional investors like you're talking about already?
Yeah, I have. There's a group out of Chicago that we've chatted with, a group out of Charlotte that we've chatted with. I wouldn't say one of the mistakes that we made, but one of the mistakes that we made is we raised too much capital. Where they're like, well, you've already got 50% of the equity piece. Typically, a GP's got 10% of the equity piece. So what that's done is it's kind of complicated how their capital goes into a deal because they want to write a big check, and now they've got to write a big check on multiple deals in order to hit that minimum balance.
So go back, you just said GP, so they're coming in as a general partner?
We're the general partner, they come in as the LP.
LP.
Yes.
Okay.
And do they want to be catalytic funding, or do they want to knock out all of the funding on the equity side?
So our projects we have in phases. The group we're talking to in Chicago wants to fund our first phase of units. So our 250 units, they want to fund that second half of the equity.
So you said that you have less competition because people are sort of running from Portland, and you're embracing that because it's your backyard. Does that hinder you in any way when you're out raising money? Are people telling you, I don't want to invest in that market specifically because of the bad press?
I would say a majority of our investors tell us they don't want to invest in Portland and Multnomah County. A majority do. But then once they kind of see, not only the numbers, but why we're doing it, the advantage we have, they're like, yeah, we definitely want to invest in Portland. That makes sense. And then Portland's, it's got bad press. It's a pain in the ass. But just over the last couple months, I don't want to say they've been backtracking a lot of the stuff that they've implemented, but they've offered developers, for example, they've had the inclusionary housing since 2016. And just recently, they put out, if you have 10% of your units at 60% area median income, then the entire improvements of the building has a 10-year property tax exemption. So that means you're not paying property taxes on your entire building for 10 years while just offering 10% of your units for 60% AMI. So that's none of these deals that we had done. We had that underwritten because obviously we're like, yeah, we're paying our $2,500 a unit for taxes. So now our models have gotten a lot more attractive.
How does that overlay with inclusionary zoning? Because doesn't Portland still have the thing 20 units and up?
Yep.
Has to have that. So it still has to have that, or is your 10% 60% AMI thing.
So they offer both. It's
Okay.
you either have,
you pick a program.
Yeah, you pick one of the other.
I see.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
and to give some more color on that, right now is actually a pretty darn cool time to be a developer in Portland because they've made significant changes. Was it 17 when they passed inclusionary zoning? And so you have this rush of permitting trying to get in before inclusionary comes into zoning. So that forces a bunch of inventory into a period of time. But what they found out is, and this is how government works, is they don't know what the solution is. And so they throw a solution out there. Now it's adjusting to those solutions. And now you throw the perfect storm of market conditions messing everything up. So now you've got, okay, well, we kind of messed it up with laws, which then forced this developer activity. And then we had interest rates and a recession. And now they're trying to do Band-Aid patches.
Because they're not getting the units they wanted.
Correct.
The whole idea was we wanted to have more units with more affordability, and now you just get less units. I remember when this happened, there was hundreds of projects that were in for permitting for like 19 unit projects. It's like nobody ever built a 19 unit project in Portland before they came up with these laws. Like they're just trying to work around those laws. They change the whole landscape without even understanding what they're doing.
Right, and we're talking projects that could have been 25, 30 units, 40 units, and they go to 19, and this all affects their master plan, where they plan, we have to have this many households, we have to have this many units, we create this zone, and now we undercut the amount of units this much property should have built for us. And so now, well, we need different solutions and different solutions. So it's actually kind of a cool time because they realize that they kind of need some builders out because builders are not coming to Portland. They're losing their grasp on Portland, which then goes to your overall strategy of looking 10 years out, which is, and we talked about this where Salem's on the back end or the Valley's on the back end of this. Portland is coming to an inventory shortage because we're running out of all that inventory that was pushed 2 years ahead. And we talked about this in our broker call today. The only lifeline has been COVID. So as developers have been falling out, the labor has actually had this extended lifeline to actually exist. And now we're getting to this point where that lifeline for the labor is about to run out. So their costs are not going up. You're getting all kinds of subsidies on the soft cost side of the project from the city government. You're buying land at the cheapest you've ever bought it, especially if you're in the commercial zones, because now in Portland, you have this middle housing. You have developers saying, well, we lost our skin with middle rise. We're going to go to cottage cluster. So you have money going to different types of land. And the financing is making land the cheapest. The hard costs are the most steady they've ever been. The soft costs are getting reduced. On the back end, the excess inventory has been absorbed. So now you have firmer rent values on the back end. And so when you think of your plan and why do you do what you do, your zoning dictates a lot of it. The density is going to dictate your construction site. But then when you think of, well, I'm looking at institutional money, the developers that did really well in Portland started in 2012. And they were local developers that built mid-rise construction. When those were done, values changed. They rolled those up, sold them to institutional investors. And as they were selling those, they also had a pipeline build of now entitled land at a basis 3 years prior. Then they build that out and they have excess equity. And now you hold these. And then they build another cycle that they then build and roll up again into institutional investing. And so when you say 200 units of residential construction, not commercial construction, because it's in the burbs, it's residential zoning, it's not commercial zoning, you can get that same scale by doing 5 projects in Portland as one huge project in Hillsborough. But you have a different mix of incomes, you have a different mix of subsidies, and now you also have that carrot that can potentially attract the institutional funding. But you're also in the middle of probably the worst time ever to try and raise money. So that's probably the new, your model's sound, but now convincing people that it's sound.
No, that's it's been unique because fundraise, I'm not going to say it's been easy the last year and a half, but I think because development takes so long, we're not getting checks, $200,000 checks or a couple $1 million checks. They're sophisticated investors and they understand, we're not investing to see what's going to happen next year or even the following year. We're investing because we think 3 years from now.
Long term.
Yes, exactly. So that's a component of it. But then you always run into exactly what you were saying. I mean, it's Portland. It's got its headline risk, and there's just people that don't want to do it. Totally understand. But you had made a point about institutional coming in and buying the portfolio. That's a huge part of our strategy, and that's why we like Portland too, is if we've got 850 units and we can sell, let's say 400 of those units to an institutional buyer and use those proceeds to pay off the LPs on the other projects, well, now we own those 400 units without any investor capital. So that's kind of part of our strategy, is build something that we know an institutional buyer can come in and take out.
Mm-hmm. Where'd you learn about syndication, GPs, LPs, and raising money? And is this books, or you meeting with syndicators?
No, the same place I figured out that I should get into real estate.
Google.
It's just now Chat GPT.
Yeah, now it's Chat GPT.
So what you're saying is you don't need to go to U of O. You just need Google.
Yep.
And you can figure this all out. So tell us, are you bullish? Go ahead, Mike.
A transitionary time in Portland was after the crash and getting big institutional money so you can start doing those mid-rise projects. Southeast Division Street's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the story of Eric Crest saying I had to fly lenders into Portland and then get them to the waterfront at 7 a.m. in the morning so they could see thousands of bikes cross the bridge.
Yeah.
And that was the catalyst to getting the equity he needed to then turn Division Street into one of the top 5 streets in the nation, as Wall Street called it in 2016.
Yeah.
So are you at a point now where you, from a stigma standpoint, flying lenders in to say, hey, look at Portland. It's not what the media's made. We've got some stuff under control. There's livability here. Are you with that? Does that make sense for you?
You know what? The groups that we've talked to know that. They know that the headlines are worse than what it is. We had a group, Newport Alder, come out maybe about 2 months ago, and that was the first thing. They're like, other than seeing all these Subarus, this is a really great spot. It is not as bad as we thought it was going to be.
They don't like Subarus?
I don't think they have anything against them, but I get it. I mean, I'm like, all right, yeah, there's too.
Mike drives a Subaru.
It's so beat up.
Oh, yeah, it was probably your Subaru.
It was.
Bumpers falling off.
You can hear it coming down the road. I'm so ready.
But a lot of the groups get it. They get the hey, no one wants to be there, but there's a lot of things pulling in the right direction. And if we can get in before everybody else realizes that they need to get in. So yeah.
That was exactly what my question was be, where you guys are going with this, is you're bullish on Portland, at least for the next 6 years.
Yeah.
Because you've got a pipeline full of projects coming out of the ground over the next 6 years. You think your product type, infill in Portland, with this podium style build, is going to be a popular product, at least for the next 6 years?
I hope so.
And if it isn't, do you have a plan B? Do you press pause on some of those projects if money doesn't line up, or funding changes, interest rate change, demand changes? Do you have levers built in that you can duck and dodge a little bit to where you wouldn't bring all 850 out of the ground?
Totally. Yeah. So a lot of the land we own it outright, so we don't have a lot of holding costs other than the property taxes. But working with our attorneys over at Talkentorp, when we had the investor that came in with the 1031 money, it was, well, how do we actually get the 1031 money and make sure he's in compliance with his 1031?
Because you got to spend it in the first 6 months, right?
You got to spend it, but it's also like, if he invested into our entity, then it would have to be a tenants in common. And the way the tenants in common would work is like, well, I don't have any equity into it, so I don't get the slice of this pie that I want in the deal. So our attorneys had worked on the Ritz-Carlton building, which was a ground lease structure. And that's what we've been doing to tie up land for a cheap basis. So essentially it's like, we'll do a 99-year ground lease. Let's say we've got 4 houses. They're all cash flow producing. We do a 99-year ground lease. We pay our investor the cash flow that's coming in, and we have an option to buy it at any point. So it's, hey, if we're ready to go vertical and financing for new construction on ground leases sucks, let's just go ahead and buy it. Otherwise, we can have a low cost and have control of the project. It also allows us on our basis, if we do a ground lease new construction loan, the land is essentially taken out from the numbers. The bank's like, we don't care what the land is. And now we're looking at a lower equity contribution that's required because we just took out a couple $1 million from the land basis. So it's all kind of relative, but the idea being that if we do it in phases and we don't have any ticking time bombs, then we should be able to maneuver.
That's really, really
When you
smart.
buy them out, can they then trade that into ownership of the building?
That's exactly the way it's structured.
Oh, I love it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The best part of this podcast is stealing shit for the future.
And the investors love it too, because they look at it like, hey, if you guys blow this thing up
Yeah.
and the bank takes it over, they're now my tenant. And they're still paying me the amount of money that I was supposed to get paid for the ground lease. So their risk is very limited. And then once the project's done, they can hop into the project as we buy our option.
So rather than asking a landowner to contribute their land into your project, you tie it up first with a ground lease so that now you get to pick when you go vertical. When you go vertical, then it's baked in with a price already set on today's valuation.
Yes.
And then they have the opportunity at that point to either get cashed out or contribute into your deal.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So is it hard to find these deals? Because you have a ton of stuff lined up in the pipeline. So how are you finding them all?
Man, I probably get sent like 20 deals a week. I mean, I look at a ton of deals. Most of them I don't even need to underwrite. I can just say like, oh, I don't like the location or that's too expensive. But if something pencils, then I start digging into it. And it's really, our two sites off of Cesar Chavez, originally we were going to purchase them. Then the landowner kind of caught wind about what we do, and we had told them, hey, we partner with landowners. And like, hey, we'd love to partner. But then there's the whole tax caveat of taking a land contribution into an entity because, well, then now
It's
that
a sale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's setting up the contribution and admission agreements. They're essentially investors that subscribe into the investment. So there's a bunch of documentation to it, but ultimately they're partners in the deal.
Are you guys doing the 721? Are you letting people trade equity in to contribute for shares of your projects? Or how are they working that on a tax side? We'll talk about this after the show, but
Yeah,
we're
I'm
doing
sure.
this with the SMI fund where
Okay.
we allow people to contribute their real estate in, they contribute their equity in, and we trade them for shares of our fund.
Oh.
And it's not a taxable event.
Oh, that's great.
So it's like a 1031, but you're swapping for
Yeah, I'd love to
shares.
pick your brain on the fund
Yeah.
aspect of it, because
Yeah.
that's something that our attorney is like, you should just start a fucking fund.
Yeah,
And I'm like, well,
IRS tax code 7721, and it might solve some of the problems you're talking about right now. Yeah.
great.
Guys, before we wrap it up, we got a couple more minutes. Is there other questions, Trevor?
Oh, we got more time. So do you try to do a lot of construction at Perm right now?
Yes and no. So our 68 unit project that will probably start sometime in July or August, the lender we're working with is giving us a 30-month term on the loan. It's expensive money, but we're supplementing a portion of it with PACE financing, which is at like 7%. So our blended rate's a little bit less.
What's PACE financing?
It's I don't know if you've
See,
heard of it.
I don't have Google, so I
Okay.
just ask questions.
Oh yeah.
I just took what catalytic funding is, so I tried to sound smart earlier. Then I heard of PACE.
So PACE is essentially a program. It's county by county, and originally it was created for all these office buildings that needed seismic retrofitting.
Oh.
And essentially they come and they fund 100% of those improvements. And it's kind of turned into like a funding for eco-friendly. So if you're doing like, it's not crazy. If you're doing mini splits, that sort of stuff, then they will fund your project.
Is government insured or government?
It is. It's kind of like EB5, where they've got regional centers in every city, and that regional center essentially services those funds and makes sure that it gets paid. What's interesting about PACE, though, is it's not a lien. It's part of your tax assessment.
Oh,
So you pay the PACE financing through your taxes.
tax bill.
Yes.
Ah, all right.
But it's helped us kind of lower our cost of capital a little bit, so we can get longer terms.
That's really cool. So you're not okay. So there's a bunch of creative ways to finance these developments.
Yes.
You got to know how banks work, how private funds work, and how all these things work. Investors, what they're looking for.
Yep.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was curious because you're doing massive deals now. You're doing really big deals, and you're probably thinking you're going to do even bigger deals.
Mm-hmm.
Getting into those at such a young age, was it like a mindset thing, or was it just starting to do it and pitching people on? Like, what roadblocks have you ran into? Because they're like writing a 27-year-old multi-million-dollar checks. Like,
Honestly, I think doing the 55 unit building was kind of like, I can do this. So there's not, I always have this saying that I say to my fiance, is like, what are we talking about? It's like, well, we're going back and forth. What are we talking about? I've always wanted the investment raising aspect not to be a pitch, but to be an opportunity for an investor. And what I mean by that is, hey, we've got this 120 unit building. It's going up. It's going up whether you invest or not. And that's not our approach to it, but that is how we approach the conversation. And so I don't think it ever was an issue. I mean, I've had investors be like, God, did you go to school for finance, or how did you get into this? And a lot of it is just being honest and being like, dude, I dropped out at a young age and just grinded to learn. And then surrounded myself with professionals like you guys that could give me advice or assist on a project. But no, I actually think a lot of my investors think I'm older.
He has a great beard.
Yeah.
That helps.
Yeah.
And I would much rather invest money with you when you show me a 55 unit project that you just built on a nice brochure instead of showing me a diploma that you got, from graduating college or something. I mean, it's to know that you've proven yourself.
Yeah.
And not only did that prove it to the investors, it proved it to you.
Absolutely.
And you came at it with a whole different sort of confidence once you had done it, because it's very difficult to raise money when you don't have that confidence.
Yeah.
When you know what you're doing and you say, hey, I'm going to do this deal one way or another. We'd love for you to join us. If you don't, that's fine too. We'll hit you up on the next one.
Yep.
That's a great way to come about it. And then people go, hey, I don't want to miss out on this. Like, these guys are building great projects and they're making a lot of money. I want in.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. Anything else we missed? Should we take a little breather and come back and talk about a deal?
One more note. I want to share how I met Michael.
Okay. Let's hear it.
So this is super cool. Like, if you're trying to get into real estate, guys like Michael are just out there and share all of this information with you freely. I was just at a meetup in Portland at a random bar. There was probably like 20 people there 2 years ago, just talking to people. I was like, oh, what do you do? He's like, oh, I've built like 200 apartment units or whatever it was at that time. I was like, what do you mean you did that? How old are you? And he was just like, I was like, this dude is insane. And like, he was just at the meet. We were just both there at the meetup hanging out. And I was like, how'd you do this? And then we go to lunch. I'm like, how are you financing all this? I'm like, holy shit, Michael knows his stuff. Like, your like information you have on financing too is insane that like most people do not have. Like, that's what we dive into all the time. And when we were sitting down with Michael, it's crazy just to understand banks and all that. So all that to say, you can meet people like Michael just out and about, like you go hang out at our meetup too.
Yeah, don't be afraid to talk. I mean, I think people that are successful love to share the lessons they've learned. I mean, he's passing on a legacy not only to his kids, but to all of us in this room and the people listening. There's a lot of valuable information here. So, yeah, thanks for joining us, man. My brain's about ready to explode. listening to you talk. But I can see why you're getting gray hair at 29 already. Yeah. We also have 2 kids now.
That's,
so
I think, the larger
20-month-old. You're probably maybe not sleeping as much as you used to. But we really appreciate you coming on the show, Michael. We're going to come back in our next episode. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about a deal, like a good deal or a bad?
Well, I don't know.
Either way we want to go. So stay tuned for the next one. And thanks for joining us here on Deal Junkies.